Today we are at the Colonial National Historical Park at Jamestown, Virginia. Okay, we are exploring this old town in Jamestown Island. This is also known as the historic Jamestown Settlement. Jamestown Island is the original site of the first permanent English settlement in North America. In December of 1606, the Virginia Company, under charter from King James I, sent an expedition of 3 ships to establish an English settlement in North America. When the 3 ships, the Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery, arrived near the banks of the James River on May 14, 1607, 104 men and boys set foot on what would soon become Jamestown, a new colony named after their king. So this is where the 3 ships landed. We are now entering the Memorial Church. Despite the efforts of the new settlers, the colony was immediately plagued by diseases, famine, and violent encounters with the native population. Within a year, by January of 1608, only 38 of the 104 original settlers were alive. It was only through the appointment of John Smith as a governor and his leadership that the colony survived. And as a governor, he made a better relationship with Chief Powhatan and the native Indians in the region. His policies helped the colony survive, including a Bible-based principle that says, "He that will not work will not eat," found in 2 Thessalonians 3:10. That's John Smith's statue. Unfortunately, on October of 1609, John Smith was sent back to England for medical reason, and in his absence, the colony once again was on the verge of collapse. By winter of 1609, a major starvation occurred in the colony. Recent archaeological findings even suggested that the starvation was so extreme that the colony resorted to cannibalism. When the supply ship Sea Venture arrived with an English merchant named John Rolfe on May of 1609, only 60 colonists survived out of 500 just before John Smith left for England. But despite the tragic loss of lives, the colonists' fate dramatically changed when John Rolfe introduced tobacco seed to the colony, which became the cash crop that allowed the colony to thrive. John Rolfe also married Chief Powhatan's daughter named Pocahontas, where their marriage brought greater peace with the Indians. There's the Jamestown Museum. Tobacco plantation became so lucrative in Jamestown that more lands were demanded and more workers were needed. So England decided to recruit thousands of indentured servants from the mainland to work at the colony with a promise to be given acres of lands after working at the plantations for at least 7 years. In the year 1616, John Rolfe brought his wife Pocahontas and his 1-year-old son Thomas Rolfe back to England. In London, Pocahontas became famous as she was presented to the English society as a, quote, civilized savage, in hopes to stimulate investment in Jamestown. But unfortunately, the following year, in 1617, Pocahontas died at Gravesend, Kent, England, of unknown causes. Few months later, John Rolfe returned to Virginia to further expand the tobacco industry. Despite thousands of indentured servants working on the plantations, still do not suffice the laborers required for the booming Jamestown, that in 1619 the first 20 captive Africans were transported to Jamestown to work as slaves. John Rolfe died sometime in 1622, but his contributions allowed the English settlements to become permanent, thus solidifying the English presence in America and making possible the first steps toward the creation of the future United States. And that's our family visit at Jamestown Historic Settlement in Virginia. Today we are at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to see the Liberty Bell and the Independence Hall. The Liberty Bell was originally ordered in 1752 by the Pennsylvania Provincial Assembly. They sought a bell to be placed in the new State House, which is now known as Independence Hall. The bell was intended to commemorate the 50th anniversary of William Penn's Charter of Privileges, which was a significant document in the establishment of Pennsylvania's government. The Liberty Bell was cast in 1752 in Whitechapel Bell Foundry in London, but it cracked during its first test ring. The bell was recast twice by local founders John Pass and John Snow in 1753. Then on July 4, 1776, the bell is believed to have rung to announce the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The Liberty Bell has become a symbol of liberty and justice. Over the years, the Liberty Bell has become an enduring symbol as it embodies the spirit of American freedom and democracy. Okay, we're going across the street to check out the Independence Hall. Independence Hall was originally constructed between 1732 and 1753 as the Pennsylvania State House. It became famous for being the site where the Second Continental Congress met from 1775 to 1783, and more importantly, where the Declaration of Independence was adopted on July 4, 1776. This Independence Hall also served as a meeting place for the Constitutional Convention in 1787, where the United States Constitution was debated and signed.
Would anyone care to guess what this particular room was used for? Perhaps this might reveal the answer.
And that's where George Washington sat during the Constitutional Convention in 1787.
As famous delegates, such as Benjamin Franklin, by the way, folks, this is your time to just take photographs of the room, as well as enjoy a moment of reflection. After a sign, just a few words about the importance of the room.
And this concludes our visit of Independence Hall and Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Our next stop is Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, about 18 miles northwest of Philadelphia. The American Revolutionary War to seek independence from England began in April 19, 1775. In late 1777, the British occupied the Patriot capital of Philadelphia. The Continental Congress fled to York, Pennsylvania, leaving the General George Washington, the leader of the new country's army, to keep alive the hope of independence. Washington decided to have his troops winter at Valley Forge, which is a day's march from Philadelphia. On December 19, 1777, more than 12,000 soldiers and hundreds of civilians built 1,500 log huts and 2 miles of fortifications, which would become the fourth largest city of America. But the winter conditions of 1777 to 1778 was extremely harsh for the soldiers. Soldiers faced severe cold temperatures without adequate clothing or shelter. Many soldiers live in makeshift huts, which were poorly constructed and overcrowded. Food shortages were common, leading to malnutrition and illness among the troops. The lack of supplies and proper sanitation contributed to the difficult and often desperate condition they endured. Approximately 2,500 soldiers died at Valley Forge during the winter of 1777 to 1778. But despite these challenges, the experience at Valley Forge proved crucial for the Army's development as they emerged better trained and more unified, particularly due to the efforts of Baron von Steuben, who was a Prussian military officer selected by George Washington to train his Continental Army. Baron von Steuben implemented effective training methods and standardized military drills, which significantly improved the Army's discipline and effectiveness in battle.
Again. Fire.
George Washington's Continental Army won several significant battles after their encampment at Valley Forge. One of the most notable victories was the Battle of Monmouth, fought on June 28, 1778. The Army's improved training and discipline contributed to their performance in this battle, where they held their ground against British forces and demonstrated their enhanced military capabilities. Private Joseph Plum Martin of the Continental Army wrote in his journal, quote, "We were determined to persevere." George Washington's Continental Army demonstrated their resilience and determination despite facing severe hardships. George Washington's leadership at Valley Forge and his army's dedication have shown the world the commitment to a common cause, which is the American freedom and independence. And that is how Valley Forge received a mark as a vital event in the history of the American Revolution. We are on our way to Baltimore, and we decided to stop by this historic house called Robinson's House. Robinson House was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1970 here in Delaware. In the 1740s, the house was sold to a Philadelphia merchant named Thomas Robinson. Following Thomas Robinson's death, the house was passed to his son, who was commissioned as a Pennsylvania Continental Army officer at the outset of the Revolution. The younger Thomas rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel, serving with distinction during the war. Many prominent figures stopped to visit this house throughout history until it was sold in 1851. Now for our final destination, let's go to the home of the Star-Spangled Banner, Fort McHenry in Baltimore, Maryland. We are walking around the perimeter of Fort McHenry. This place is really fortified with cannons. You can also see a beautiful view of the bay. It's a little cold this morning, so it's a perfect time to walk around the fort. The American Revolutionary War against Great Britain officially ended on September 3, 1783 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. This treaty recognized the independence of the United States and established borders for the new nation. But not even 3 decades later, after signing the Treaty of Paris, these two countries were at odds again. On June 18, 1812, the young United States declared war on Great Britain. America declared war on Great Britain due to several key grievances. The two main grievances were the impressment of sailors and trade restrictions. The impressment of sailors was when British forced American sailors into their navy, claiming they were deserters, which violated U.S. sovereignty. The second grievance is the trade restrictions. Britain imposed trade restrictions that hindered American commerce, particularly through the Orders in Council aimed at limiting trade with France. We're entering one of the bunkers. Let's check this place out. Is it locked? So we're heading out. The bunker door is locked. Hi. The attack on Fort McHenry by the British ships began on the night of September 13, 1814, which lasted till the next morning of September 14. The attack was part of the British campaign to capture Baltimore. After successfully defeating the American forces at the Battle of Bladensburg, the British aimed to seize Baltimore, which is considered one of America's vital port city. Fort McHenry was subjected to a fierce bombardment by British naval forces. The attack lasted throughout the night and into the early morning of September 14. But despite the intensity of the bombardment, American forces at the fort, commanded by Major George Armistead, held their ground. After a whole night of intense bombardment, the British forces still failed to capture Fort McHenry. As dawn broke on September 14, 1814, the American defenders observed the American flag was still flying over the fort, signaling their resilience. Despite the 4 American casualties and 24 wounded, the American forces resisted the dramatic British bombardment of Fort McHenry and proved they could stand up to a great world power. The exploding shells and rocket fire from the British warships inspired Francis Scott Key, who had been watching the attack from a nearby ship, which led him to write a poem called The Defense of Fort McHenry, which later became known as the Star-Spangled Banner.
World War II, when the Coast Guard had a training school out on the front lawn, all of these structures became airway shelters.
That became
They're
what?
only used for drills.
Oh,
so
okay.
you get that drill and you head for these.
Francis Scott Key was a lawyer and an amateur poet. On the night of the British bombardment of Fort McHenry, Francis Scott Key was aboard a British ship to negotiate the release of Dr. William Beanes, who was an American prisoner detained by the British forces. Key and his companions were unable to leave the ship due to the ongoing military action, forcing them to witness the attack from the British vessel. The next day, September 14, Key was filled with a sense of pride and relief upon witnessing the American flag still flying over Fort McHenry. Our national anthem, called the Star-Spangled Banner, was based on Key's perspective of America's resilience, symbolized by the American flag. The American flag became the symbol of hope and unity of a nation that has the resolve to triumph in the face of adversity. Our American flag, also known as the Stars and Stripes, symbolizes the ideals and values that embodies the American spirit, such as national unity, sacrifices, perseverance, justice, and freedom. Well, I hope you also learned some U.S. history, as our family definitely have on this road trip. Once again, thanks for joining us and hope to see you on the next Negosa Family Making Memories videos. God bless.